Every other room had been emptied out, but that one door had been 16 penny nails, dozens of them, driven flush into the wood. She was 19. She owned a boat that was sinking, and she had $87 in a Ziploc bag. That was the whole of it. Every other room had been emptied out, but that one door had been nailed shut from the inside. We'll get there, but first you need to understand who was standing on that dock and what she had left to lose, which wasn't much. Maren Calloway stood on the mudbank at Cotter's Landing with $87 in a Ziploc bag and a duffel holding everything she owned. The brass compass with the cracked glass sat in her right jacket pocket where it always sat, needle frozen slightly east of north, pointing toward something that didn't exist anymore. Her dark ash-blonde hair was pulled into a loose, low ponytail that hadn't seen shampoo in 4 days. The olive-green canvas jacket hung past her wrists, frayed cuffs brushing her knuckles. She was 19 years old. She had been on her own for 14 months, and the car that got her this far, a 2007 Civic with a cracked exhaust manifold and a passenger door that didn't open, had died outside Ellsworth last Tuesday with a sound like a coffee can full of bolts hitting concrete. Before that, foster care. 7 placements in 11 years. Before that, a mother who was there on a Wednesday and gone on a Thursday. No death certificate, no forwarding address, no note on the counter, just a 6-year-old standing in a kitchen waiting for someone to come back through a door that stayed shut. The state couldn't find a body, couldn't find a trail, couldn't find a relative willing to sign paperwork. So they did what the state does. They moved the problem, house to house to house, until Maren turned 18 and aged out with $43 and a packet of documents in a manila envelope that smelled like an office she never wanted to see again. 14 months later, she was looking at a boat. Cotter's Landing sat at the end of a peninsula on the Maine coast, like a fist at the end of a broken arm. Population 340, down from 1,100. The ferry terminal had closed in 2009. The fish processing plant shut down in 2014. What was left? A diner, a hardware store, a post office open 3 days a week, and a harbor full of lobster traps belonging to people who couldn't afford to pull them. The kind of town where the buildings leaned like they were too tired to stand straight, and nobody had the money to push them upright. The Annalise sat at the municipal dock. 94 feet of steel hull built in 1961, a passenger ferry that once ran the island route twice a day. She'd been listing at that dock for 15 years. Rust bloomed across her waterline in long brown streaks like dried blood. Her wheelhouse windows were fogged. Her name was painted on the stern in letters so faded you had to squint. The town had been trying to get rid of her for a decade. Too expensive to tow, too heavy to scrap, too ugly to ignore. She just sat there, settling a little deeper every winter, becoming part of the harbor the way a dead tree becomes part of a field. Saturday in October, the town held a surplus auction on the steps of the municipal building. 3 people showed up. A man bought a snowplow blade for $40. A woman bought a filing cabinet for $12. Then the auctioneer got to lot 7, the Annalise, and the 2 other bidders looked at each other and laughed. Nobody raised a hand. The auctioneer dropped the minimum to $50. Nothing. Dropped it to $25. Nothing. Dropped it to $9 and said he was going home after this regardless. Maren raised her hand, because the boat had a galley, a wheelhouse, and a passenger cabin with a door that closed. The clerk stamped her receipt and didn't look up. "Congratulations, you just bought a tetanus shot." $9. That left $78 in the Ziploc bag, and the bag was getting lighter every day. From the fuel dock 30 yards away, a man watched the whole thing without moving. Faded navy blue wool watch cap, dark brown Carhartt chore coat over a cream-colored thermal Henley, dented stainless steel thermos with a red cap in his left hand, tortoiseshell half-moon reading glasses hanging on a thin, braided leather cord around his neck. Virgil Pease was 67 years old, and he had the kind of stillness that comes from decades of watching weather decide whether you work today. He watched Maren take her receipt. He watched her walk down the ramp to the dock. He said nothing. He drank his coffee. That night, Maren walked the Annalise with a flashlight. The passenger deck was gutted, benches ripped out, bolts left in the floor like pulled teeth, wiring stripped from the bulkheads. Someone had taken the copper years ago. The engine room was flooded to the knee, water black and still, smelling of diesel and salt and something deeper, something mineral, like the harbor itself had started digesting the hull from the inside. But the galley stove worked on propane. She found a half-full tank under the counter and turned the burner, and it caught on the second try, blue flame popping to life with a sound like a small, held breath finally released. The crew berth behind the galley had a mattress that wasn't moldy, a wool blanket folded at the foot, a porthole that opened enough to let air move. She could hear the tide working against the pilings, steel creaking in the current, that low, rhythmic groan of something massive and tired shifting in its sleep. She could live here. Then her flashlight found the upper deck. She climbed the companionway stairs, one hand on the rail, boots ringing on steel grating. Past the wheelhouse, empty, gauges dark, helm wheel locked. Down a short corridor, and at the end of it, a door. Not just closed, sealed. Dozens of 16-penny nails driven flush into the frame, heads nearly invisible, sunk so deep the wood had swollen around them. Someone had done this with purpose, not haste, precision. Every nail spaced 2 inches apart, driven straight, countersunk. This wasn't someone locking a door in a hurry. This was someone making sure it stayed shut for a long, long time. Maren pressed her palm against the wood. Cold radiated through it, deeper cold than the October air outside, like the room behind it held its own climate. She pulled her hand back. A sound below, nails clicking on steel deck plate. She came down the companionway and found him on the dock. A border collie, gray-muzzled, chest faded to silver, the rest of him black with white markings on his front paws. Thin but not wasted. Brown eyes, slightly clouded. No collar. He stood at the base of the gangway, watching her the way old dogs watch. Patient, undemanding, like he had all the time left in the world and planned to spend it right here. She sat down on the deck, stopped trying. He walked up the gangway and lay down beside her, head on his front paws, watching the boat. Next morning, Virgil Pease came past on his way to the fuel dock. He stopped, looked at the dog, looked at Maren sitting against the wheelhouse wall with her hands in the pockets of her olive green jacket, the compass pressing against her right palm through the canvas. "That's Keeper," Virgil said. He was Frida's dog, been sleeping under the terminal since she died. He didn't explain who Frida was. He left a claw hammer on the dock without comment, walked away with his thermos in his left hand, reading glasses swinging against his chest, and didn't look back. Maren's flashlight had already told her what that hammer was for. Up on the upper deck, behind dozens of 16-penny nails driven flush, someone had sealed that captain's cabin and wanted it to stay sealed. And down on the dock below, Keeper lay with his head on his paws, watching the Annalise the way he'd been watching her for years, like he was waiting for someone to finally open what had been closed. She started on the nails the next morning, 16-penny nails, driven flush into old-growth Douglas fir by someone who meant it. Not a couple, not a dozen. Maren counted 31 before she stopped counting and just worked. The claw hammer Virgil had left on the deck rail. No note, no explanation, just a hammer where a hammer was needed, fit her hand like it had been waiting for her. She hooked the claw under the first nail head, leaned her weight back, and the wood screamed. That's not a metaphor. Old iron in old wood makes a sound when you tear it loose. A high, wet shriek, like the grain is tearing itself apart to let go of something it's been holding for decades. The nail came out bent, trailing rust the color of dried blood, and left a raw crescent in the planking where the claw bit down. 1 nail. 30 more to go, at least. Her arms were burning by the 8th nail. By the 14th, her palms had gone past blistered into that numb leather feeling where the skin just gives up complaining. The brass compass sat in her right jacket pocket, clicking against her hip every time she shifted her weight. Some nails came out clean, Some snapped off at the shank and she had to dig the stubs out with the claw's notch, prying splinters the size of her finger out of the frame. Some had rusted so deep into the grain they weren't nails anymore. They were part of the door, fused into the wood like old bone. 2 days. She slept on the deck the first night because she couldn't make herself stop and walk back down to shore. Keeper lay at the foot of the gangway, silver-gray muzzle on his paws, brown eyes tracking her every time she moved. He didn't come aboard. He just watched, patient, old, like he'd been doing this longer than she had. The last nail was the worst, driven at an angle, bent where someone had hammered it sideways to make damn sure this door never swung open again. Maren worked the claw under it, set her boot against the frame, and pulled until her shoulders popped. The nail came out with a sound like a rib cracking, and the door drifted open 3 inches on its own. The smell hit first. Old paper, machine oil, cedar, not faint, not a suggestion, but a wall of it, like cracking open a chest that had been sealed since Nixon was president. Cold air underneath, the kind that lives in rooms where no one has breathed in years. And something else, something dry and sharp and almost sweet, like the ghost of ink that had been drying for decades. Maren pushed the door the rest of the way open with her palm. The hinges didn't even groan. They were oiled. Whoever sealed this room had oiled the hinges first. Think about that for a second. They oiled the hinges, then nailed the door shut. They wanted it preserved. They wanted it found. Just not yet. The captain's cabin was small, 8 feet by 10, maybe less, but it was complete, intact. A sealed time capsule floating on a dead ferry in a harbor where nobody looked twice. Shelves bolted to the port and starboard walls, floor to ceiling, and on every shelf, composition notebooks. The cheap kind, black and white marbled covers, wide ruled, the kind you bought at a drugstore for 79 cents in 1974 and probably still can for $1.29. Dozens of them, stacked upright like library books, spines out, each one labeled in the same handwriting with a date range. March 1974, November 1976, December 1976, August 1979. On and on, shelf after shelf. A narrow bunk against the aft wall, made with military corners so tight you could bounce a quarter off the wool blanket. A barometer mounted beside the porthole, its needle frozen halfway between fair and change. Tide tables pinned to a corkboard, charts of the island channels, hand-annotated in pencil, depth soundings circled and corrected. And a photograph, framed in plain black wood, screwed to the bulkhead above the bunk. A woman standing at a ferry wheel, one hand on a spoke, the other hanging loose at her side, captain's cap pushed back on her head. Not smiling, not posing, just there. The kind of face that looked at weather and didn't flinch. Broad shoulders, deep-set eyes, a jaw that said, "I will outlast you," and meant it. Maren pulled the nearest notebook off the shelf. The cover was cold. She opened it to the inside front page and read the name written there in blue ballpoint, pressed hard enough to dent the paper. Frida Solberg, March 1974. She opened to the first entry, read it standing up, flashlight in one hand, notebook in the other, the smell of cedar and old ink filling the cabin like a held breath. And here's where the story cracks open. These weren't navigation logs. They weren't ferry schedules or maintenance records or tide charts. Frida Solberg had been keeping a different kind of record entirely. She'd been watching the passengers. Not all of them. Not the summer tourists or the commuters or the locals hauling groceries. Frida watched the ones who were in trouble, and she wrote down what she saw. April 3rd, 1974. Man, gray coat, no bag. Rode the 8:15 out, rode the 10:40 back, rode the 1:20 out again. Never got off. Third crossing. I told him coffee was free for crew. He drank it with both hands shaking. June 19th, 1976. Girl, maybe 19, garbage bag instead of a suitcase. Sat on the car deck behind the port lifeboat where she thought nobody could see. I could see. September 2nd, 1981. Woman, bruised face, sunglasses on a cloudy day. 2 daughters. No luggage at all. She paid the fare in coins and wouldn't look at me. I wrote down the plate of the truck that followed her off the boat. Entry after entry, year after year. Frida's handwriting changed over the decades. Tighter in the 80s, looser in the 90s, shakier after 2000. But the format never did. Date, description, what she noticed, what nobody else saw. Have you ever found proof that someone was paying attention to the world when everyone else had looked away? That's what Maren was holding. 34 years of it. She read until 3 in the morning. The flashlight dimmed from white to amber to that sick yellow that means the batteries are dying, and you've got maybe 20 minutes left. Keeper had come aboard at some point, she didn't remember when, and lay across her boots at the foot of Frida's bunk, his weight warm and steady, his breathing slow. Maren wasn't crying. She was doing math. 34 years, dozens of notebooks, hundreds of entries. One woman on one ferry in one forgotten harbor, writing down the names of people the world had decided not to see. She turned back to the first notebook, opened it to the first page, read it again, slower this time, the flashlight guttering against the words. Entry 1, March 1974. Woman, red coat, 2 girls, no luggage. She wouldn't look at me when I took the fare. I wrote down the plate of the truck that followed her off the boat. The logbooks were not about the ferry. They were about the passengers. Every single one. On the bunk, Keeper lifted his head and watched her, his clouded brown eyes steady in the dying light. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. The composition notebooks kept pulling her back every time she started to drift, and by the time gray light crept through the porthole, she'd read through 3 of them, each one denser than the last, each entry a careful record of someone Frida Asa had watched step onto that ferry and known, just known, was running from something with teeth. But it was day 6 when things changed. Maren was on her knees beside the bunk, reaching underneath for a dropped pen when her knuckles hit steel. Not the hull, something else. She flattened herself against the cabin floor, cold through her faded heather gray sweatshirt, cold through her jeans, and looked. A footlocker, military green, riveted corners, bolted directly to the deck with lag screws so thick they'd need a socket wrench to budge. And on the front, a padlock the color of dried blood, rusted so solid the shackle had fused to the body. She pulled at it. Nothing. She braced her boots against the bunk frame and pulled harder. The whole boat groaned, but the lock didn't move. Maren sat back on her heels and pressed her tongue against her teeth and said nothing. That afternoon she was on the dock, just sitting, feet hanging over the edge, the brass compass with its cracked glass turning slow circles in her palm, Keeper lying behind her with his silver-gray muzzle resting on her boot. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She wasn't asking for anything. She was doing math in her head. $168 left in her account, minus the gas she'd need if she ever drove anywhere again, minus food, minus the single coffee she allowed herself each morning from the gas station 2 miles down Route 15, and the numbers kept shrinking like a tide going out. Virgil walked past. Faded navy watch cap, Carhartt chore coat, thermos of black coffee in his left hand, tortoiseshell half-moons hanging on the braided leather cord around his neck. He glanced at her. She didn't look up. He kept walking. 20 minutes later, his truck came back down the gravel. He climbed out carrying a cutting torch, tank, hose, striker, the whole rig, and set it on the dock planks 3 feet from her left hand. "Acetylene's full," he said. Then he got back in his truck and drove away. Didn't ask what it was for, didn't wait to be thanked, didn't even cut the engine. That's the kind of man Virgil Pease was. He gave you the tool. What you did with it was your business. Maren hauled the torch down the companionway and into the cabin. She pulled the striker, adjusted the flame until it hissed blue-white, and put it to the padlock. Keeper backed away from the heat, retreating to the far corner of the bunk with his ears flat, those clouded brown eyes watching. The padlock glowed, first cherry red, then orange, then a color that doesn't have a name, somewhere between sunrise and the inside of a kiln. The shackle gave with a sound like a knuckle cracking, and a ribbon of smoke curled toward the overhead. She killed the flame, lifted the lid. No treasure, no gold coins, no stacks of cash wrapped in rubber bands. Folders. Manila folders, dozens of them, packed tight and standing upright like files in a clerk's office. Behind them, envelopes, letter-sized, business-sized, some hand-addressed, some typed. Carbon copies on tissue-thin paper, handwritten letters in Frida's block print. And everything, organized by year, cross-referenced by entry number to the composition notebooks Maren had already been reading. She pulled the first folder, 1974. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten, a woman's name, a destination, bus fare provided, $42, and a contact name in Blue Hill. Below that, a note in the margin in smaller script, pulled from February pay. Maren pulled the next folder, and the next, and the next. Here's where I need you to understand something. Sit with this for a second. Frida also was a municipal ferry captain. She made what ferry captains make, not nothing, but not much. Government pay. Enough to keep the lights on and the diesel flowing, and maybe put a little aside if you didn't eat out and didn't drink, and didn't buy anything you didn't absolutely need. And she gave it away. Systematically. For 34 years. Envelopes of cash. $200 here, $340 there, $85 to cover a prescription, $150 for a bus ticket to Bangor, pulled from her own paycheck and handed to people whose names she wrote down in composition notebooks because the system that was supposed to catch them had holes big enough to sail a ferry through. She didn't just watch, she arranged. Letters to a shelter in Rockland, letters from a network of fishermen's wives in Stonington who had spare rooms and didn't ask questions. A community leader in Blue Hill who could find work for someone who needed to disappear. A motel owner in Bucksport who'd hold a room for 3 nights on Frida's word alone, bill sent to a P.O. box Frida paid for herself. Maren read the case files one at a time, cross-legged on the bunk, folders spread across the wool blanket. Entry 12, 1976. A woman in a torn coat with a swollen eye and nothing but a paper bag. Frida gave her bus fare to Bangor and connected her with the Blue Hill contact. Margin note. Safe. Confirmed Tuesday. Entry 77, 1989. A woman with a newborn son, no car seat, a bruise on her forearm shaped like fingers. Frida bought the bus ticket herself, put her on the 640 to her sister in New Hampshire. Margin note. Called Thursday. Both okay. Entry 141, 1998. A man, a veteran, Frida noted, still wearing his dog tags, whose surgery bill of $3,200 was paid anonymously through a clinic in Rockland. Frida's bank statement clipped to the back of the folder showed the withdrawal, $3,200, from a ferry captain's checking account. Each entry precise, each one a life that turned left instead of ending. Maren wasn't crying. Not yet. She was methodical. She sorted the folders by decade, rebuilt the filing system Frida had designed, traced the network in her head. Stonington, to Blue Hill, to Bucksport, to Rockland, a chain of ordinary people connected by one woman on one boat who decided that watching wasn't enough. 193 names, 34 years, every dollar accounted for in the margins. Maren stared at the filing system spread across the bunk. 193 names across 34 years, families relocated, medical bills paid, safe houses coordinated, an entire underground rescue operation run from the wheelhouse of a municipal ferry, and realized Frida didn't just watch, she intervened. Every single time. Day 9. She'd been at it methodically, the way Frida would have done it. A through B took 2 full days. The Andersons, the Beckers, the Burkes, each folder a life compressed into documents and receipts, and sometimes a single handwritten note that said everything a court filing couldn't. Maren worked through them with her back against the bulkhead wall, Keeper stretched out on the deck beside her, his silver-gray muzzle resting on his front paws, his clouded brown eyes tracking her hands as they moved from folder to folder. She reached the C's on the morning of the 9th day. Her fingers walked across the tabs. Caldwell, Campanella. And then they stopped. Calloway. Not typed, handwritten. Frida's handwriting, that same careful, slightly left-leaning print that filled every logbook entry upstairs in the wheelhouse. Maren pulled the folder. It was thick, thicker than any other file in the cabinet by at least an inch. The manila was soft at the edges, worn from handling, and when she opened it on the bunk, the contents fanned out like a hand of cards dealt by someone who'd been holding them for years. The photograph was on top, black and white, slightly overexposed. A woman standing on a ferry deck, not this ferry, an older one, the railing lower and painted white, holding an infant against her chest with both hands. The woman's hair was silver even then, cropped short, and she was not smiling for the camera. She was smiling at the baby. The baby had one fist wrapped around the collar of the woman's coat and was looking directly into the lens with eyes that were already gray-green, already steady, already watching. Maren turned the photograph over. Frida's handwriting. Maren, 6 months. Her mother's face, exactly. The air left the cabin, not dramatically, just gone. The way pressure drops before a storm rolls across open water, and for a second everything is perfectly, unnervingly still. She set the photograph on the bunk, carefully, the way you set down something that might shatter if you breathe wrong. Beneath the photograph, a letter. Lined paper torn from a spiral notebook, the perforated edge still ragged. The handwriting was not Frida's. It was hurried, slanting hard to the right, the pen pressed so deep it left grooves on the back of the page. Ink smudged in 2 places, water or something like it. The date at the top, March 14th, 2005. Frida. They're coming for me. I have to go. Take care of her. I left the compass so she'd find north. You were always my north. Don't let them tell her I didn't want her. I wanted her so much, it's the reason I have to leave. R. That's it. That's the whole letter. 43 words on a piece of notebook paper, and every single one of them rewrote 19 years of Maren Calloway's life. Because here's what Maren had been told. By caseworkers, by foster parents, by a stepfather who packed her clothes in a garbage bag and set it on the porch and said, "Don't come back." She'd been told her mother left because she didn't want the weight. She'd been told her mother was an addict, a drifter, someone who treated a child like luggage she could check at the door. Nobody fights for you, kid. Nobody ever did. Every single word of it was a lie. Beneath the letter, court documents. Maren's hands were already trembling, but she made herself read. Petition for emergency custody. Minor child. Maren R. Calloway, age 6. Petitioner, Frida Solberg, age 61. Filed April 2005, 1 month after the letter. Frida walked into a county courthouse and asked the state of Maine to give her a girl who was not her blood, not her kin, not anything the law recognized as hers. Denied. Petitioner is unmarried. Petitioner resides aboard a vessel. Petitioner's age presents concerns regarding long-term care capacity. Frida appealed. Denied. She appealed again. New documentation this time. Proof of income. A co-signer on a lease for a house on Cotter's Landing she'd never lived in. 3 letters of recommendation from islanders who swore she was the steadiest person they'd ever known. Denied. She filed a 3rd time in 2007. Different judge. Same result. The state placed Maren in foster care, assigned her a number, moved her 4 times in 3 years. And Frida kept filing. Motion after motion, each one stamped in red ink, each one a door slammed in the face of a 63-year-old woman who refused to stop knocking. The filings ended in 2008, not because Frida gave up, because the first stroke took her writing hand. Every filing was in the folder, every red stamp, every denial. Frida had kept them all, stacked in chronological order, as if someday someone would need to see the proof. as if someday the girl herself would need to hold the evidence that the world was wrong about her. Maren's hands shook so hard the papers scattered across the bunk. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes, pushed until the pressure steadied her, until the white flare behind her lids burned the tears back before they could fall. Her throat closed around something she couldn't swallow. She picked up the photograph, Frida on the ferry deck, the baby with the gray-green eyes and the fist wrapped around a collar, and pressed it against her sternum, against the faded heather gray of the crewneck sweatshirt, against the bone beneath. Every placement, every caseworker clipboard, every foster home that sent her back like a package with the wrong address. Every night, on a floor, or a cot, or the back seat of a dying car, believing the one thing every single adult in her life had confirmed, that nobody wanted her. And the whole damn time, a woman on a ferry was fighting the state of Maine for her. Keeper pressed his head against her knee. His clouded eyes didn't blink. He didn't move. If you've made it this far, stay with me, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Maren reached into the right pocket of the olive green canvas jacket. Her fingers found the brass compass with the cracked glass. She pulled it out and held it in her open palm next to the photograph. The needle quivered and settled, slightly east of north, the way it always had, the way it had every single time she'd checked it in every group home, every shelter, every rest stop parking lot where she slept with the doors locked and the engine running for heat. The compass was never broken. It was pointing toward the dock, toward the water, toward Frida. Maren sat on the edge of Frida's bunk, holding the custody petition. 3 appeals, 3 denials, Frida filing until 2008, when the first stroke took her hand, and her mother's letter. I left the compass so she'd find north. You were always my north. Her hands shook so hard the papers scattered across the bunk. Keeper pressed his head against her knee. Someone had wanted her. Someone had wanted her the entire time. 3 days she sat with it. 3 days of reading and rereading those custody petitions, those denial stamps, that letter from her mother with the line about the compass and finding north. 3 days of Keeper pressed against her leg on Frida's bunk while the Annalise rocked in her slip and the world outside kept turning like it hadn't just cracked open underneath her. Then Colin Hatch showed up. Gray BMW. Gravel parking lot at the Cotter's Landing terminal. He stepped out like he was arriving at a gallery opening. Charcoal gray wool peacoat over a navy cashmere sweater, dark slate chinos with a crease you could cut paper on, brown leather Chelsea boots that had never touched a dock in their life. Tall, lean, 6'1" easy, dark chestnut hair with a slight wave, parted on the right, trimmed like it cost more than Maren's last 3 meals combined. Warm hazel eyes with gold flecks, 3-day stubble that looked maintained, not neglected. And that slim, black leather portfolio tucked under his left arm like it was grafted there. He carried 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, not gas station coffee, not the stale dregs from the diner on Route 1. This was the kind of coffee that came in a cup with a logo Maren didn't recognize, and it smelled like something from a life she had never lived. He smiled when he saw her on the deck. Not a salesman's smile, worse, a real one. Maren Calloway? He held out the coffee like a handshake. Colin Hatch, I've been watching this vessel for about 4 years. Heard she finally changed hands. 4 years. He'd been circling like a current. He didn't push to come aboard. He stood on the dock with his Chelsea boots on the salt-stained planks and talked about the Annalise like a man who'd memorized her blueprints. He knew her tonnage. He knew the year her keel was laid, 1923, Thomaston Yard. He knew about the refit in 61 and the engine swap in 78. He opened the slim black leather portfolio on a dock piling and showed Maren restoration plans, actual architectural drawings, hull plating schedules, interior renderings with brass fixtures and reclaimed oak, and porthole windows polished to mirrors. He wanted to turn her into a boutique hotel vessel, moored in Portland Harbor, 12 cabins, a cocktail bar in the main salon, weekend history cruises in the summer. He talked about it with genuine reverence, and here's the thing that made him dangerous. He wasn't wrong. The plans were beautiful, the vision was real. He loved this boat. $45,000, he said. Cash. I can wire it tomorrow. You'd be saving the boat by letting someone with resources take care of her. He said it gently, the way you'd say it to someone you genuinely believed couldn't handle what they were holding. And maybe that's what burned, not the condescension, because it wasn't quite condescension. It was certainty. Colin Hatch looked at a 19-year-old girl in an oversized olive green canvas jacket with frayed cuffs, standing on the deck of a vessel that needed more money than she'd see in a decade, and he was certain about how this ended. Maren's hand found the brass compass in her right jacket pocket. The cracked glass caught the light. I'm not selling. 3 words. No heat, no negotiation, just granite. Colin didn't flinch. He nodded slowly, tucked the portfolio back under his left arm, and set his card on the dock piling next to the coffee he'd brought her. When you're ready, he said, patient, because the math was on his side and he damn well knew it. She watched the gray BMW pull out of the gravel lot. Then she drank his coffee, because it was good coffee and she had $31. 2 days later, she found the bonds. The barometer in the captain's cabin had always hung slightly crooked. Maren had straightened it twice, and both times it tilted back, like the wall behind it was uneven. On the 3rd try, she pressed along the edge of the paneling and felt it give. A false panel, hinged at the bottom, swinging inward on brass pins that had been oiled recently enough to still move. Behind it, a cavity in the bulkhead about the size of a shoebox. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with a rubber band so old it crumbled at her touch, a stack of United States savings bonds, Series EE, made out to bearer. She counted them on Frida's bunk, counted them again, counted them a 3rd time because her hands were shaking and she kept losing her place. $52,341, purchased one at a time, 1 bond per quarter, sometimes per month, going back decades. The oldest was from 1974. The newest was from 2007, the year before Frida's first stroke took her hand. $52,000, plus Colin's $45,000. That was $97,000. She was 19 years old and she owned nothing, and $97,000 was more money than anyone in her entire life had ever held in one place at one time. Have you ever had that moment where the way out is so clear it almost blinds you? Where the number is right there and all you have to do is reach? She didn't reach. Not yet. But she didn't put the bonds away either. 2 a.m., galley floor. Keeper asleep against her left leg, his silver-gray muzzle twitching in a dream. The overhead light was off, just the small brass lamp above the stove casting a yellow circle on the counter where Colin Hatch's business card sat next to her phone. The bond certificate spread across the floor in front of her like a paper tide. And the math. God, the math. $31 in her checking account, minus $14 for propane, minus $8 for the crackers and peanut butter she'd been living on. That left $9. $9 and a vessel that needed $80,000 in steelwork on the hull alone. Engine rebuild, another $40. Marine survey would condemn her on site. Insurance was a joke she couldn't afford to tell. $9. $80,000 in repairs. A card on the counter with a number that would solve everything. Maren picked up her phone. Colin's number glowed on the screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button. The Annalise creaked around her like an old woman shifting in her sleep. Then she saw it. Tucked behind the last bond, pressed flat against the oilcloth where she'd missed it in the dark. An envelope, cream-colored, soft with age, addressed in handwriting she now knew as well as her own pulse, Frida's careful, slanted script. To whoever pulls these nails. She hadn't opened it yet. The phone was still in her hand. The doubt was still alive. Maren opens the envelope with her thumbnail. The paper inside is a single sheet, lined, torn from a composition notebook, the kind with the black and white marbled cover you can buy at any dollar store in America. Frida's handwriting fills it edge to edge, slanting hard to the right the way it does in every logbook entry, every receipt, every note taped to every cabinet on this boat. But this one is different. This one starts with a name. If it's you, Maren, "No, I never stopped looking." 6 words that hit like a car wreck in slow motion. If it's a stranger, know this boat carried people to safety for 34 years, and she is not done. Don't sell her to someone who will make her beautiful and empty. She was never beautiful. She was necessary. Maren reads it twice. The brass compass in her right jacket pocket presses against her hip where she's sitting cross-legged on the galley floor, and she doesn't move to adjust it. She reads it a third time. The bond certificates are still fanned out around her knees. Colin Hatch's card is still on the counter above her head, that crisp white rectangle with the embossed navy lettering, and she reaches up and takes it and slides it into her back pocket. She doesn't throw it away. She just doesn't pick up the phone. And listen, that's the whole thing right there. She doesn't throw it away. Because Maren Calloway is not a person who pretends the math isn't real. She knows the hull needs $80,000 in steel. She knows she's got $31 and a pile of bonds that might cover half of the work if she's lucky. She knows Colin's offer would solve every problem she's ever had. She just also knows what Frida wrote. She was never beautiful. She was necessary. Some sentences don't leave room for negotiation. Morning comes in gray. Fog sitting on the water so thick the harbor markers disappear. Maren walks the deck of the Annalise in her scuffed brown work boots, hands in the pockets of that olive-green canvas jacket, the frayed cuffs brushing her knuckles. She doesn't announce anything. She doesn't call anyone. She goes below and starts cleaning the galley. She checks the propane line, cracked fitting at the junction, but the tank holds pressure. She inventories what works. 1 burner on the stove, the hand pump at the sink, the overhead light on the starboard side. She opens every cabinet and counts what's inside. Keeper follows her from compartment to compartment, his silver-gray muzzle low, his clouded brown eyes watching her hands. The decision is visible in the way she scrubs the stovetop with a rag she found under the sink, in the way she stacks the chipped plates by size, in the way she tests the latch on the forward hatch and marks it with a piece of tape that means, "Fix this." Her body has already decided. Her mouth never had to say a word. 3 days later, she walks into a bank in Ellsworth with $52,341 in matured savings bonds and a driver's license that almost expired. The teller is a woman in a blue cardigan who looks at the bonds, looks at Maren, looks at the bonds again. Maren opens a new account. She deposits every cent, every single one, not into a personal account, into an account she names Annalise Hull Fund. $52,341 committed to a boat that may never float again. She walks out of that bank with $31 in her pocket for food. The teller asks if she's sure. Maren looks at her with those gray-green eyes, the faint birthmark near her hairline catching the fluorescent light. "I'm sure," she says, 5 words. The teller doesn't ask again. If you've made it this far, stay with me, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Colin Hatch comes back. Of course he does. That charcoal peacoat, that cashmere sweater, that slim black leather portfolio tucked under his left arm like a security blanket for men who've never been insecure a day in their lives. He parks his Volvo at Cotter's Landing and walks the dock with the easy stride of a man who has a bigger number ready. He's rehearsed this. He's got comps, projections, a revised offer that accounts for the bond value she's already spent. He's smooth. He's warm. He genuinely believes he's doing her a favor. But Maren doesn't let him start. She's standing at the logbook table in the main cabin, and she turns it to face him. Entry 77. She's cross-referenced it with a file from the cabinet, a carbon copy bus ticket, a handwritten note, a name. 1989. A woman with an infant son, fleeing. Frida put them on a bus to a sister in New Hampshire, paid for the ticket, packed a bag of food, wrote the sister's address on the back of a fuel receipt, and tucked it in the woman's coat pocket. The woman's last name was Hatch. Colin's mother. He didn't know. Watch what happens to a man when the floor disappears. Colin Hatch. Smooth, confident, portfolio-carrying Colin Hatch with the hazel eyes and the 3-day stubble and the open-palmed gestures designed to make you feel heard, sits down on the deck. The portfolio stays closed. He reads the entry once. He reads it again. He looks out at the water. The fog has burned off, and the harbor is bright and flat and merciless. He doesn't cry. He doesn't argue. The mask doesn't crack with anger or tears. It cracks with recognition. Something quiet and terrible settling into place behind those gold-flecked eyes. His entire professional identity, acquiring, restoring, monetizing beautiful old things, was made possible by a woman who never restored anything, who just kept the engine running and the door open, who bought a bus ticket for a stranger and her baby and never told a soul. He closes the logbook. He sets it gently on the deck. He stands. He doesn't explain. He doesn't apologize. He walks to his car and he drives away. 1 week later, lumber arrives at Cotter's Landing dock. Marine-grade planking, enough to rebuild the entire passenger deck. Stacked clean, wrapped in plastic, delivered by a flatbed out of Bangor. No name on the delivery slip, no invoice, no note. Virgil stands there in his faded navy watch cap, thermos in his left hand, tortoiseshell reading glasses hanging on their braided cord. He looks at the lumber. He says nothing. Maren stands beside him, hands in her jacket pockets, the compass pressing against her palm. She looks at it. She says nothing. Keeper walks over, sniffs the stack once, and lies down on top of it. He puts his head on his paws and closes his clouded brown eyes and goes to sleep. Word spreads the way it does in coast towns, not through newspapers or social media, but through the network Frida built, still alive in phone trees and church directories and handwritten address books that people never threw away. The lumber showed up on a Tuesday with no name on the slip. By Thursday, a man drove down from Bucksport in a flatbed with a MIG welder strapped to the bed and 200 pounds of welding rod packed in wooden crates. His name was Dale Pruitt. His mother was entry 12. He didn't shake Maren's hand. He just looked at the Annalise, looked at the hull plates buckled and rusted along the waterline, and said, "Frida got my mother out. Tell me where to start." He started at the bow. Saturday, a woman from Blue Hill named Connie Weymouth pulled in with a hatchback full of marine paint, 6 gallons of hull white, 4 of det gray, brushes still in the plastic. Her grandmother had been part of the Safe House network, one of the women who drove families from the terminal to the church basement in Sedgwick when the roads were clear. Connie didn't say much. She popped the hatch, set the paint on the dock, and asked if there was coffee. There was. Virgil's thermos. Always. The next week, a woman drove all the way up from Stamford, Connecticut, 11 hours, because her name was in a notebook from 1981. She brought a casserole in a ceramic dish covered in foil, and she stayed for 3 days, sanding rust off the Annalise's deck rails with 80 grit paper until her hands blistered. On the second night, sitting on the dock eating crackers and canned soup, she told Maren, "She paid for my sister's medicine in '94. $1,400. Never said a word. My sister didn't find out until after Frida died." She said it the way people say things they've been carrying for decades. Flat, precise, like testimony. And that's what it was. Testimony. One witness at a time. If you've made it this far, stay with me. Because this is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Virgil told her the full truth on a Wednesday evening. They were sitting on the dock, the harbor going copper and gray in the last light. He had his thermos in his left hand, his half-moon reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, his watch cap pulled low. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said it. He'd been Frida's deckhand for 22 years. Every rescue, every midnight drive to the bus station in Ellsworth, every family moved through the terminal after hours while the harbor authorities slept. He kept watch. He drove. He never told a soul. When Frida died, he nailed the cabin shut himself, drove every nail with a 3-pound framing hammer, one at a time, because she made him promise. The records would wait. The right person would come. She said you'd come. He didn't look at Maren. He looked at the water. She said the compass would bring you. Maren's hand went to her right jacket pocket, the cracked glass of the brass compass pressed against her palm. Frida died owing nothing to anyone and being owed by everyone. Virgil took a slow drink of coffee. That was the richest a woman could be. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The restoration took months, not because the work was complicated, though it was, but because it came in waves, the way tides do. Dale Pruitt taught Maren to weld on a scrap plate first, then let her run beads on the real hull. Sparks dropped into the harbor water and hissed out like tiny stars dying. The smell of marine epoxy and salt hung over the dock so thick you could taste it. Hull plates went on one at a time, each one a different weekend, a different volunteer. A retired marine mechanic from Castine rebuilt the fuel pump. A woman who ran a canvas shop in Stonington sewed new bunk curtains from heavy duck cloth. Virgil oversaw all of it from the dock, thermos in hand, glasses on his forehead, back straight as a mast. Keeper lay in a patch of sun on the foredeck, his silver-gray muzzle resting on his front paws, his clouded brown eyes tracking every movement with the patience of a dog who had been waiting his whole life for the boat to come level again. And it did, degree by degree. The Annalise's list corrected like a held breath finally released. One evening, sitting on the dock with her boots hanging over the water, Maren told Virgil about the foster homes. 7 placements. The ones that were bad, she didn't describe them, just held up fingers, 2, like a count. The ones that were just empty, she held up the rest. Everyone said nobody wanted me. I believed it because the math checked out. She held the compass in her open palm, the cracked glass catching the last orange light off the harbor. The math was wrong. Virgil nodded once. He didn't offer comfort, didn't touch her shoulder, didn't say he was sorry. She left you standing. He set his thermos down on the dock plank. That's the whole of it. That was enough. Months later, the Annalise sits upright at the dock, hull patched and painted white, engine turning over on the second try, then the first. Galley lit and warm, the smell of coffee and cedar oil drifting up through the companionway. She doesn't run a ferry route. She is a floating shelter. 3 berths with clean sheets, a warm galley with a stove that works, a door that locks from the inside. Maren keeps a new logbook and a fresh composition notebook, the cover still stiff. Entry 1 is her own name, Maren Calloway. November. Stayed. The notebook sits next to Frida's on the same shelf. A November evening. A car with a cracked taillight pulls into the terminal parking lot. A woman steps out carrying nothing. Maren walks down the gangway with a key and a bowl of soup. She doesn't ask for a name. She doesn't ask for a story. You eat yet? The woman shakes her head. Come aboard. Keeper follows them up the gangway, slow, steady, his nails clicking on the steel. The light in the wheelhouse is on. The compass on Maren's shelf still points slightly east of north, toward the dock, toward the water, toward whoever comes next. The door is open. It has always been open. Someone just had to pull the nails. Home is not where you're born. It's where someone finally pulls the nails off the door and lets you in. The light is still on. It has always been on. Someone just had to be brave enough to stay.